from the Psych Hub Podcast Network.
Welcome back to the wrap-up show for the Burnout Antidote, infusing well-being into healthcare culture. And Amy, I just had a flashback when we were trying to remember the name of this podcast because it's been through. And the reason for that is, I'll let the listeners in. I remember several times conversations trying to figure out what to call this thing. And I think part of it really fits in with this wrap-up show. I think we have really finally spoken to what the title is. We've done it justice, I'm going to say.
I agree with you. And it was certainly a long one to remember. But just in case folks haven't joined us right from the beginning, I thought it would be helpful for us to introduce ourselves again before we dive right in.
Oh, yeah. So sorry. Hey, this is Paul Deger.
And I'm
my co-host.
And I'm Amy Pearlman here with my co-host. Clearly, we're eager to get into the conversation today.
Exactly. And, we started with a metaphor, didn't we? When we met with our expert, our friend, Tekla, and that this metaphor, we were at the trailhead of a beautiful trail in the Colorado Rockies, and we were setting off to be guides, exploring burnout, moral distress, well-being within the healthcare culture. It has been quite the amazing journey, Amy, and no one else I would have rather taken this hike with than you.
I feel the same way. And I started thinking about this reflection as we were preparing for today's conversation. And I just started to think, I'm coming back. I'm a little sweaty, a little relieved, but also feeling a little bit, I don't know if disappointed or sad or a loss is what the right, I haven't figured out what the right word is yet, but the importance of words, just as you were talking about, how do we name our podcast? How do we name what it is that we're going through and that we've gone through together on this journey?
Yeah, I'm going to keep the metaphor going because I'm thinking about how do you feel after a hike? Usually you feel like you've done a bit of a workout and, you take off your boots and your feet are a little sweaty and maybe a blister or two and, little aches and pains. But then you have this memory of an experience that'll always be with you. And I think that's what I'm feeling right now. And all the people that we met along the way have touched me in ways I don't think I fully have understood yet. But I think my perception of the healthcare environment has radically shifted. And I feel all the more compelled to what more can I do because more work needs to be done, I think.
I agree. I feel as if I'm more aware of the situation, which comes with kind of its benefits and sometimes its drawbacks, but it has become a part of me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I took some time. I had all my old notes from listening to the different stories, and I flipped through those before we met today. And powerlessness is a theme that kept coming up in different ways, shapes, and forms. And for a moment, I felt a bit of sadness. Like it's easy to get stuck there. It's sort of like a black hole that even though I'm not delivering care like I used to, I felt that sense of how easy through no fault of your own to get pulled into that place. And that's where I hope we've offered like a rope down into the hole for people to start climbing back out and not be stuck in that place.
One of the words that stuck with me was stuck. So you mentioned it.
Yeah.
I mentioned it even in just that sentence.
Mm-hmm.
I thought about two components, is this idea of stuck and where do you find the space or the freedom? And that awareness has given me a gift of creating the space, of knowing that, hey, naming it, knowing that this is what I'm going through. The other thing that stood out for me was prevalence, and that idea of how this has existed. It hasn't just been the podcast conversations we've been having. The conversations we have about burnout and well-being in the workplace come up
Mhm.
every day. And that's every work day, but also
Mm.
on the weekends, on the holidays, on vacations, thinking about
Yeah.
what does that mean in healthcare spaces and in non-healthcare spaces, but boy does healthcare feel unique.
Well, and, as you were speaking, I had this moment of all the people that we heard from. You and I are wrapping up a podcast today, but their lives go on. And I'm hoping by giving them space to share their story, we've allowed them to have maybe some healing, maybe some movement within the suffering that they were experiencing. And then for all of our listeners, that you are still in the trenches out there doing the work, and I'm hoping that maybe some leadership has listened as well, that some further action can happen from these conversations you and I have had listening to all these stories.
I started to think through this idea of how much courage and how much strength and how
Mm.
much space is necessary to tell your story. And maybe this is because the storytelling episode was recent,
Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah.
maybe it is because there's some stories I'm not ready to share yet.
Hmm.
But I started to think about folks maybe in the trenches was the word you used for it, but this
Hmm.
idea that I hope that we have created some space
Yeah.
and brought in some tools that allow our
Hmm.
community to get enough space to figure out what's the end to my story, or even what's the next step to my story
Hmm.
to move through this.
Well, and I like how this metaphor of space, because when you are feeling stuck, I think it is confining. And as we have talked about in many of the episodes, self compassion, I think, is an antidote for that stuckness, because it does start to create some space where maybe it feels like there is none. And by no means is it a solution unto itself, but I think it creates the ground from which solutions are going to be found. And, it's interesting. The other common theme that to me balances out powerlessness was this sense of, a lot of people talked about being stuck in a role. You put the white coat on, or you step in as the nurse or the PA into the room, and how restrictive roles can be. And we've talked so much about allowing us to be imperfect humans doing this work of healing. And I almost want to be quiet for a moment, because I don't know if I can say anything more profound than that we are imperfect humans doing the work of healing with other humans. And self-compassion seems to allow us to return to that place, that space, that yes, there's tasks to be done, but it's all within this relationship of me and another human being, who just maybe have a point of contact for one moment, and yet the power of that one moment for both people involved in the work of healing is just, if we can get back to that place, I think we can fix this.
The word that sticks with me is community and
Yeah,
common
yeah.
humanity, which we have talked about a lot in this podcast. It still
Mm-hmm.
sticks in my mind
Mm-hmm.
as community,
Yeah.
but the self compassion, the ability to give ourselves space to be who we are and to be real and
Mm-hmm.
genuine in our connection with others,
Yeah.
that prevalence, which feels daunting sometimes, can also be reassuring. So I think in those stuck spaces, and I only feel this way when I'm out of it to some extent, but in
Mm-hmm.
those stuck spaces, there's something in transforming from feeling stuck or trapped into something that feels
Yeah.
held and supported, which is that
Mm-hmm.
still, I mean, for those of you that can't see us, which is everyone but Paul, I really am using my hands to think about this like held metaphor, this idea of what can support or some scaffolding, and to think about what kind of pulls us through.
Well, and to that point, when you talk about being authentic and real, Amy, to do this journey with you, And I hope that we've modeled authenticity and realness in these conversations. And that I think both of us admitted from the start, like, I remember writing the description of the podcast and like, oh my goodness, I just wrote something. I don't know if I can live up to it. And thank you for creating the space where I didn't have to let that get in the way of taking the risk and having some tough conversations and listening to some hard stories. I think not only I think we created some good content here for further discussions. I'm hoping we modeled how to have discussions like this. And thank you, because you were just such a joy to have these discussions with.
Thank you, Paul. I That means a lot to me, and this has been a true partnership where things do feel less daunting when you have a partner
Hmm.
or a
Yeah.
community. And we can call in some of our colleagues and our producer into that community as well. But this
Yes,
has
very much
definitely
so.
been a team effort. And I hope that people find their teams to be able to take the journey on their own.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, that now I invite our listeners to find the people that you feel safe being vulnerable and open with, and to have these conversations, which I think then fuels courage to maybe step out of the comfort zone and maybe go have these conversations where it does feel a little more daunting. That if we have inspired that, I think we've done our work here.
That fingers crossed.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be presumptuous, let us know in the comments, maybe we missed something. And what I do want to invite listeners into is use the comments to continue this collective, maybe continue the discussion. What takeaways do you have, or what gaps did Amy and I totally miss? We're all in this together. It's not just Amy and I, it's all of you listening. And maybe you can continue the conversation there if that's not too bold to ask for.
I love that. And I love this idea of mentoring as we go through this. I like to think back to Tekla starting us out on this journey and really have seen her as a mentor in this work.
Yeah.
And I certainly can't do this work perfectly, but I hope that I have more mentors going forward. I hope that this creates more people who are interested in being mentors in this space. And
Yeah.
this idea that mentors aren't perfect either. So pulling us all together to do the work as a community without any one person being an expert, I'm with you, Paul. I know we missed things, but we did
Hmm.
our best.
Okay, we did. I have a strange metaphor to throw in here, and hang with me, this will make
Okay.
sense. Back in the day when my wife and I were trying to decide if we wanted to bring a child into this world, and we went back and forth, and I had a dear coworker who, um, she shared this from her country. I think she was from Peru, and they had this beautiful saying that a baby arrives with a loaf of bread under their arms. I'm like, wait, what? How is this helping me make a decision? She goes, no, think about this. That if you wait till you're ready, you will never have this child. And there's some things that you don't wait till you're ready, you jump in and do it. And to mentor, to have these conversations, I think if you wait till you feel ready, that results in silence. And that there is a certain messiness to these conversations, and being willing to jump into the mess. And that it's okay if this feels kind of awkward and messy and challenging, because that's really where the best work gets done anyways,
Hmm.
right?
Thank you. I think that metaphor helps and gives us a bit of permission to be messy as
Ah,
we
good
figure this
word.
out.
Yeah. 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 Let's invite people to jump into the mess, to have conversations and figure it out. And there's not going to be one solution either to figuring this out. In some ways, I feel like healthcare is the canary in the coal mine, that these questions we've raised about moral distress within the healthcare environment, I think our greater culture is struggling with some of these things too. So if you start a conversation at work, maybe then it'll continue with the neighbor or the person down the street or the grocery store. We need to have good conversations.
I agree. I we both are talkers, so I think good conversations are kind of where we have been going with this. But I
Yeah.
also feel like we would be remiss if we did not call out the systems approach here, which feels
Yes.
really daunting, and it's something that has stood out for me as another theme around
Yeah.
this. This is not something any one person can solve on their own, and it isn't
Yes.
about any of us as individuals, because it certainly
Hmm.
feels personal in the moment.
Hmm.
And this combination of systems and how we got to where we are, um, has been a point of reflection for me in these conversations as well.
Yeah, I think it almost strikes me as a meditation of sorts. When it starts to feel like I failed, this is because I'm not good enough or smart enough, letting that be a mindfulness bell of, oh wait, no one's good enough or smart enough. I'm doing the best I can, and this is going to take a movement of the system to make a correction to get back on track.
I agree. And I also wanted to throw out there, I retook the self-compassion quiz that we used in the first
Oh,
episode. And
okay.
I don't want to say like better or worse. My score was not as kind to myself at the end as it was at the beginning. And that surprised me,
Huh.
and is
Okay.
part of why I was thinking about what this awareness means,
Hmm.
and what, maybe I'll tie it back to our last episode around substance use disorder and recovery. Is
Yeah.
recovery is not linear.
Right.
How we approach self-compassion, or how we feel, I don't know, I was like, how we score on the self-compassion quiz is not linear. um
Which sounds kind of wrong, but I hear
right,
what you're
that's what I was like,
saying.
I'm having some word finding issues today, but this idea of some days you just have a crummy day,
Right.
and
Right.
also sometimes you feel a little bit worse before you feel better.
Well, as a mindfulness facilitator, I'm compelled to speak about there's no perfection, there's just practice. And that's when I'm hearing that when you look at this linear sense of progression, like it should be better now because I've done all this work. I think it's more of a spiral. And that when you're revisiting something, you revisit it from a new place. And that's not better or worse. It's just this ongoing invitation to practice.
I i appreciate the mindfulness part of you, Paul, which I think, um, most people who interact with you really note, is there is a piece of calm. And I think that's part of what some of the fun balances between us is, that I may err towards that imperfect perfectionist. Um,
Trend towards, not
Err.
error.
No
No
errors. Okay,
errors.
I'll say trend towards. I was like, those words like
Trend
err or
towards.
should, those live a lot in my world. But having that balance and that permission to get out of my own way has
Yeah.
been really meaningful for me.
Yeah. 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 Amy, this is going to sound funny coming from me, but I think I'm finding I'm out of words.
Does that mean we're over?
Yeah. I almost feel like it's like listening to a beautiful orchestra. And when the last note is played, there's something beautiful about that silence.
Mhm.
And I'm feeling that that's the place that I'm arriving at, that there's something we've whoa, this is going to sound really bold. I think we have created something beautiful here that I don't know if I can say anymore. I think I may
I
be done.
I think that we may be done with this phase.
Yes.
I like to think about it. Maybe it's a symphony, or maybe it is I don't know, ice cream is coming to mind, but it's something that's got this aftertaste for you that like, oh, that was so good. I couldn't have a bite more.
The symphony after the ice cream after the
Yeah,
symphony.
the ice cream after the symphony. I don't know. We've got like either a food or a music or an art metaphor here, where I'm hoping that
Okay.
there's a bit of a staying power, a lingering effect.
Yeah.
And I think as you mentioned, we don't have an episode for next week, but I really hope that this is the trailhead for many as others may start on this journey as well.
Okay, one more metaphor to toss in. That at the end of a meditation, when you ring the bell, the final bell, and there's a practice of listening to simply fade away, and then what remains after that. And not to get like all profound and zen here, but back to that spaciousness, that by listening to something fade away, it creates a space for what's next. So as you and I fade away, may we create the space for our listeners for what's next on this topic.
I love that. Good luck on your journey.
Thank you all. And until we meet again, may you all be well.
If you'd like to reach us, you can do so at podcast@psychhub.com. To be notified of new episodes, don't forget to like, subscribe, or follow wherever you're listening. And reviews are so helpful, so please do leave one if you can. It allows others to find us and to join along. The Burnout Antidote is executive produced and edited by Jacob Morrison. Research is assisted by Tekla Ross. Show artwork was created by Ornella Jangoli and Ashton Smith. A very special thanks to Juliana Castro, Alyssa Fackler, Trevin Stiegel, Andrea Womack, and of course, our pet, Pickles. The Burnout Antidote is a co-production from Psych Hub and is brought to you by Janssen Neuroscience.